Hufstader tonight to the Hall of Fame. And I'll give you a little bit of his background. Gib joined General Motors in 1950 as a co-op student for both Buick and Chevrolet. What a dapper guy he was. Graduated in 1955 from GMI and went immediately into the Army. Part of the Army Scientific and Professional Program at Aberdeen, Maryland, working on the M48 tank, track, and the suspension. A little change in his attitude there. Now, wasn't all hard work at Aberdeen, as you can see. Managed to get a little bit of time hanging around the drag racing and such. Now, Gib got out of the Army in 1957 and immediately went to the R&D arm of General Motors, working on air suspension. In 1960, he joined the transmission group and developed the 10-inch clutch for the 427 mystery motor that you heard so much about. He also did a multi-plate clutch for the 455. In 1960, he was awarded the first two of his 7 patents. In 1964, he went to work for Zora Duntov, which started a long, working, and very strong personal relationship. Gib was a Corvette design release engineer for chassis, including brakes. I believe he'd found his mecca. Gib built his own race car from scratch, 1966, 427 Racer. This photograph happens to be a little bit later. He's kept that car all this time, and in fact, most recently has pulled it out to race it in vintage races at the Meadowbrook Fair that happens every August. During this time, he was highly involved in racing. In fact, he was with the Grand Sports in Nassau. In fact, this is a reunion shot here with a blonde and dapper Dave McClellan. You recall those diff coolers, those funny-looking diff coolers on the back, kind of look like a scab on a racehorse? That was Gib's idea, so you get an idea of form and function. He was with the Le Mans program in Gulfstream in '67. In 1969, he raced at Sebring, personally raced, actually drove race cars. He owns Corning cars with Tony DiLorenzo. He has been involved, obviously, in the heyday here with all kinds of Chevrolet and Corvette racing. I'd like to quote from Paul Van Valkenburg's book, and the title of Van Valkenburg's book here was, and by the way, this book was written quite a while ago. I lost the title of it. And referring to Penske, when he had first decided to run this 396 Corvette, Gib Hufstader, an amateur race driver in the Corvette production group, sort of attached himself to the project. Pretty well describes Gib. Gib was, and still is, and this book was written 20 years ago, the sort of enthusiast that Chevrolet couldn't pay to stay away from the racetracks. And he was just the sort of experienced engineer that Penske needed around. He was free. Not reasonable, anyway. 14 years of rocket science. That's right. Chevrolet wasn't in racing. Gib was also part of the AeroVette program. And one of his crowning achievements, one that he has mentioned to me as being something that he will always remember, is the two-rotor engine project. This particular example was restored recently with Gibbs' help, and at the time that Zora was still alive, and this is a photograph of them approving of it in the Chevrolet build area. 1974 to 82, Gibb was the cooling engineer for Corvette. 1984-85, he was the air cleaner engineer as well. He introduced the use of magnesium for rocker covers and air cleaner lids at that time. At that time, magnesium was not considered an engineering material, and to some, even today, they're still afraid of it. 1985, Gibb did the packaging layout for the twin turbo V8 Corvette that was being considered prior to the ZR1. In fact, there is a restored example now in the museum, both of the engine that was done and the car has recently been restored. Gibb did the initial packaging for the ZR1 as well, and one of the extreme difficulties, we filled that packaging bay from north-south to east-west, and really we're trying to get the whole thing put together. Gibb essentially invented a loading device wherein we could bring the engine up into the engine bay on center and then move it on an air bearing over the 1 inch to its installed position where it needs to be. So we solved a very difficult problem there with ingenuity on Gibb's behalf. Now, Gibb retired from General Motors in 1995, 45 years. This is not a staged shot. This had to preserve this for posterity. Nobody would have believed it. We told them about it. He never got rid of the file. In fact, when he left, there was still some he couldn't throw away. I was a benefactor of about 19 banker boxes full of ZR1 records that have managed to find their way down to the National Corvette Museum. I'd like to take just a moment more and read to you the 7 U.S. patents that Gibb has, starting in 1960, where he had the universal joint, expansion ball, spherical constant velocity, universal joint. In 1966, bent finger clutch diaphragm spring. 1974, he had flywheel torque converter, crankshaft connector and pilot, and twin rotor engine, vehicle and accessory drive connector. That was part of the twin rotor program. In 1975, differential gear mechanism structural reinforcement that allowed easier access to some of the internal components. And then in 1990, electric motor-driven air pump, part of the emissions control system that is computer controlled and still in effect today. But that's not all. In 1995, then, Gibb hadn't had enough. He contracted himself to the Chevrolet race shop and has been working in that capacity ever since. Part of the success of our C5R, as well as the lower professional racing series that Gibb has had so much to do with. So you can see he's worked for all 3 chief engineers. Now, at night, at home, Gibb doesn't give it up. Gibb has a stunt biplane. He's part owner in a Cessna 182, which you see here. He also worked with Zora on the BD5, which was an experimental airplane that Zora was preparing to fly near the end of his flying career, gathering parts and working on the layout and so on. Now, these hangars around the Detroit area are just an excuse to house all the other goodies. You have to have a plane, of course, to put in the hangar. That's the only way they'll run it to you. But as you can see here, Gib has a fairly new Ducati there on the left. Racing Ducati, 1995, 900cc Ducati. And the other Ducati, the first Ducati he bought, that's about 25 years previous to this. And of course, it's fully restored, one of 700 race jobs. And that's just a small part of his fleet. He's restored the Black Vincent. He has some, well, at last count, the last time I was privileged enough to be in his hangar, I stopped counting at about 15. Gib also enjoys off-road motorcycling. For the last 24 years, he's been doing the Wally Dallenbach Invitational Colorado 500. It's a full week worth of off-road motorcycling with some of the craziest people in this country. And as you can see, Gib is at the top of his world here, and that's way like him. He's not about to quit. He's the last time I spoke with him prior to tonight, it was a couple weeks ago at 4 o'clock on MIS weekend and the cruise night, and he was still ordering up camshafts for somebody. So thank you, Gib, for everything that you have done for us, for Corvette, and welcome
to each of the Hall of Fame inductees in previous years. It's absolutely impossible to quantify Betty Skelton's contribution to Corvette. When she joined Campbell Ewald, Chevrolet's advertising agency, in December of 1955 as the agency's Corvette specialist, the little fiberglass two-seater was on the verge of dying an unceremonious death. A grand total of only 700 Corvettes were built in 1955. Then as now, Chevrolet was the largest division of the largest automobile manufacturer in the world. It was a company in the business of building economical and reliable transportation for the great masses. Its product count was numbered in the hundreds of thousands, not in the hundreds. Many within the leadership ranks at GM did not see any point in stepping outside of the boundaries to build a high-priced, largely impractical automobile. A handful of others within the corporation disagreed very strongly. Men like Edward Cole, Zora Duntov, Harley Earl, and a handful of others believed with all of their hearts that the fledgling Corvette had a chance, if only it was steered in the correct direction, if only it was nurtured in just the right way. They knew in their hearts that the Corvette would succeed in the marketplace. These visionaries understood exactly what Corvette needed. It was already undeniably beautiful, but it had to give up any pretense that it could be all things to all people. It had to become a genuine high-performance sports car. And in short order, it did exactly that. It would get V8 engine power, standard transmissions, fuel injection, dual carburation, heavy-duty suspension, and all the other hardware it needed to be a contender, both on the street and on a road race course. That was an important first step, but it was only the first step. Something more than smart styling and the right hardware had to be injected into Corvette if it was in fact to succeed. What the car needed, in short, was personality. Well, how does a giant company like General Motors give an inanimate group of metal, plastic, rubber, and glass a personality? Pretty simple, as it turns out. You just hire the best people in the business. You surround it with larger-than-life personalities, giants of creativity, overflowing with determination, enthusiasm, optimism, and the will to just get it done. by surrounding it with the likes of Zora Duntov, Edward Cole, Harley Earl, Bill Mitchell, Barney Clark, John Fitch, Dick Goldstrand, Gib Hufstader, and the likes of Betty Skelton. Betty was born in Pensacola, Florida at the dawn of the Great Depression, and she entered young adulthood in the midst of a terrible war. Those were intensely challenging times that helped to shape her indomitable spirit.